When emotions take control of us, silence becomes our greatest act of wisdom. But by how floods your wall you move with the flow of CHELIFEILT, when frustration burns hotter than reason, or when hurt makes you want to lash out and defend yourself instantly. Those are the moments where silence is not weakness, it is protection. Because the truth is, words spoken in the heat of uncontrolled emotion rarely come from a place of clarity, they come from a place of pain. And pain, if given the microphone, often says things that the heart never truly means. We have all lived this cycle, the sting of a harsh reply, the regret of saying too much, the quiet guilt that follows after the storm of words has passed. What's fascinating is that psychology supports this. When we are overwhelmed by emotion, the part of the brain responsible for logic and reason, the prefrontal cortex takes a back seat while the emotional brain, the amygdala, steers the wheel. In that hijacked state, silence is not just restraint, it is a lifeline back to clarity. It is the pause that prevents regret. But let me add something deeper here. Silence in such moments isn't just about not speaking, it is about listening inward. When anger rises, it is usually a messenger of something hidden, a boundary crossed, a fear touched, an insecurity exposed. If we stay silent long enough, we can hear what that messenger is really trying to say. Instead of letting words escape recklessly into the world, we turn our focus inward and ask, why do I feel this way? What part of me is calling out for attention? In that pause, healing begins, because silence isn't emptiness, it is space, and space allows us to realign with who we are, not just how we feel in that volatile second. Philosophically, silence in moments of emotional overflow is an act of freedom. The ancient Stoics believed that true power lies in self-mastery, not in control over others. When you refuse to let anger dictate your words, you are declaring to yourself and to the world that you are free, that your spirit cannot be enslaved by a fleeting rush of emotion. Think of it, silence is not the absence of response, it is the presence of control. It is saying, I choose not to be ruled by this storm within me. That choice alone changes the trajectory of relationships, of conflicts, of entire chapters of life. There is also an elegance in silence that words cannot match. Imagine two people in conflict. One is shouting, desperate to be heard, drowning in the noise of their own anger. The other remains quiet, composed, waiting for the storm to pass. Which one holds the real power? It is always the one who does not allow chaos to drag them into its whirlpool. Silence in these moments is not passive. It is active resistance against being pulled into destruction. It's the art of keeping your dignity when everything else is trying to pull it away. So the next time you feel emotions rising, remind yourself that silence is not a loss. It is not surrender. It is the conscious decision to protect your peace, your relationships, and your integrity. It is the pause that transforms reaction into reflection, and reflection into wisdom. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say in a moment of anger is nothing at all. There is a kind of silence that is not about holding back emotion, but about making space for others. And this silence, too, is a sign of strength. We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard, where conversations often become competitions of volume rather than exchanges of meaning. But the truth is, the most powerful voices are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes the person who says nothing is the one who understands the most. Because when you choose to stay silent and listen, you are offering something far greater than words. You are offering presence. Think of the last time someone truly listened to you, not nodding while waiting for their turn to speak, not pretending to listen with their phone in hand. I mean someone who gave you their full attention, their full silence. Didn't it feel like a gift, That kind of silence communicates more than any advice or comment could. It tells the other person, asterisk you matter, your words deserve space. I don't need to fill every gap. I am here to understand you, not to outshine you. Asterisk psychologically, this is deeply impactful. When we listen with silence, we activate empathy. We allow the speaker to empty their heart to process their own thoughts, often arriving at solutions they didn't know they carried. In counseling, in leadership, in friendship, the quiet ear often does more healing than the clever tongue. People rarely remember the exact words you say, but they always remember how safe they felt in your silence. But let's also be honest. Silence in listening is not easy. It requires discipline. The ego wants to interrupt. It wants to correct, advise, defend, or impress. We mistake talking for connection, when in fact listening is the deeper connection. It takes humility to say, right now, my role is not to speak but to receive. That humility is what transforms relationships, whether personal or professional. It bridges the gap between misunderstanding and true understanding. Philosophically, silence in listening is an act of generosity. The 13th century poet Rumi once said, asterisk, try to accept the changing seasons of your soul with grace, and when someone shares, just listen. Asterisk in those words lies a timeless truth. By remaining silent, you honor the sacredness of another person's story. You don't rush it, you don't judge it, you don't try to own it. You simply hold it like a vessel, giving it shape through your presence. That is not passivity, it is profound strength. And there is another layer. When you listen silently, you also hear what is not being said, the pauses, the hesitations, the weight in the voice, the emotions between the lines. Words carry meaning, but silence carries truth. By resisting the urge to fill the space, you allow yourself to receive that truth. It deepens your awareness, not just of the other person, but of the entire human condition. So in moments where listening holds more value than speaking, remind yourself, silence is not emptiness, it is attention. It is the bridge that turns noise into connection, strangers into companions, and conversations into transformations. Because at the end of the day, silence is not just what you hold back, it is what you give. And sometimes the greatest gift you can offer someone is the quiet assurance that you are fully there, hearing not just their words, but their heart. There are moments in life that are too vast, too sacred, too heavy for words to carry. And in those moments, silence is not just appropriate, it is necessary. When you stand before the ocean, for example, or look up at the night sky scattered with stars, do you notice how instinctively quiet you become? No one has to tell you not to speak. The immensity of the moment commands it, because words, no matter how carefully chosen, feel too small compared to the wonder you are experiencing. That same principle applies to the moments of deep grief, deep awe, and deep respect that weave through our lives. When someone loses a loved one, what can words really do? We try to comfort, to find the right phrase, but so often those words fall short or sound rehearsed. Yet a hand held in silence, a presence that doesn't try to fix the unfixable, can mean more than any sentence ever could. Because silence in grief doesn't try to cover the pain. It honors it. It acknowledges that this loss is beyond explanation, beyond justification, beyond repair by language. It says, asterisk, I see your pain, and I will not diminish it with empty noise. Asterisk, psychologically, this kind of silence carries power. Human beings often confuse speaking with helping, but neuroscience tells us something different. In overwhelming moments of loss or wonder, the brain doesn't crave explanations, it craves safety. Silence provides that safety by removing the pressure to respond, by allowing the heart to feel what it needs to feel without being interrupted. That is why a quiet embrace often heals more deeply than 100 spoken reassurances. There is also a spiritual depth to this. Throughout history, sages, philosophers, and mystics have all emphasized the holiness of silence in certain moments. Silence is what allows us to connect to something greater than ourselves, something that words cannot touch. In awe-filled moments, whether standing at the edge of a mountain or witnessing the birth of a child, silence is a form of reverence. It says, I am in the presence of something larger than me, something that cannot be reduced to language. And that humility transforms us. It softens the ego, reminding us that not everything can or should be explained. But let us also remember that silence in these profound situations is not emptiness, it is expression. It is the loudest way of saying what cannot be said. When you remain silent in awe, your stillness speaks. This matters. This is sacred. When you remain silent in grief, your quietness speaks. Your pain matters. I will not trivialize it. When you remain silent in respect, your composure speaks. I honor you without needing to prove it with words. Silence in this sense becomes a language in itself, one that communicates soul to soul. In our noisy world, we often feel pressured to fill every gap with words. Yet the deepest truths often live in the spaces between. The most beautiful music, after all, is not only in the notes, but also in the pauses that give those notes meaning. Life is the same. Silence frames the moments that words cannot hold. So when you find yourself in situations where words are too fragile, too small, too inadequate, let silence do the speaking. Because sometimes the most profound expression of love, of awe, or of reverence is not in what you say, but in your choice to remain still. And in those moments, remember, silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of meaning. There are times in life when silence becomes the loudest proof of confidence. When accusations come your way, when someone misjudges you, or when rumors try to stain your name, the natural impulse is to defend yourself instantly. We want to explain, to justify, to prove our innocence or our worth. But here is the truth. Not every false word deserves an answer, and not every misunderstanding requires your defense. In fact, the need to constantly explain yourself often reveals insecurity, not strength. The strongest souls know that truth has its own voice, and it does not need to be shouted. Think of how often we waste our energy in arguments that change nothing. You try to convince someone who has already decided what they want to believe, and no matter what you say, their opinion remains the same. Words in those situations don't build bridges, they build walls. Silence, however, disarms. It communicates. I know who I am. I do not need to wrestle in the mud to prove it. That composure is more powerful than any clever defense could ever be. Psychologically, this restraint is a mark of self-assurance. When you stay silent in the face of provocation, you are sending a signal not only to others but also to yourself. I am secure in my truth. I will not let insecurity drag me into noise. Neuroscience even supports this, arguing in self. Defense often activates the stress response, making us more emotional and less rational, while choosing silence allows the nervous system to stay calm, preserving dignity and clarity. Philosophically, silence in these situations is a declaration of freedom. The Stoics believed that other people's opinions are beyond our control, and therefore not worth our enslavement. If you live chained to the need for validation, you will forever be a prisoner of voices outside of you. But when you remain silent and allow the truth to stand on its own, you are saying, I am not defined by what you think of me. I am defined by what is true. That is liberation. That is strength. History and spirituality both remind us of this. Great leaders, saints, and visionaries were often misunderstood, criticized, even mocked. But instead of exhausting themselves with endless defenses, they allowed time and integrity to prove them right. Because time has a way of revealing what words cannot. Lies may be loud in the moment, but silence, when anchored in truth, always outlives them. This doesn't mean silence is passive. On the contrary, it is active restraint. It is choosing the higher ground instead of being dragged into the chaos of argument. It is understanding that not every battle deserves your sword. Some battles are won simply by walking away, and that is not weakness, that is wisdom. So when someone tries to provoke you with false words, remember that silence can be the sharpest reply. You don't have to fight every accusation, because truth does not beg to be believed. It simply endures. Let your actions, your consistency, and your peace speak for you. Because sometimes the most powerful way to defend the truth is not with words, but with the quiet dignity of silence. There are moments when words do not solve problems, they multiply them. In the heat of conflict, in the middle of a tense argument, when tempers are rising and emotions are already inflamed, speaking too quickly often throws fuel on a fire that is already burning. We think we are clarifying, but we are escalating. We think we are defending, but we are prolonging the battle. In such situations, silence is not avoidance, it is strategy. It is the wisdom of stepping back to prevent damage that no amount of apology could undo later. We all know how easily words can wound. A single harsh sentence in the wrong moment can scar a relationship for years. Once spoken, words cannot be taken back. They can be forgiven, perhaps, but they are never forgotten. That is why silence in moments of high tension is not cowardice. It is caution. It is recognizing that sometimes the most courageous act is not to say what is on your mind, but to withhold it until your heart has cooled enough to speak with clarity instead of heat. From a psychological perspective, conflict puts our bodies into a state of fight or flight. Adrenaline spikes, heartbeats quicken, and our ability to think rationally diminishes. In that state, the likelihood of saying something we will regret skyrockets. Choosing silence allows the storm within to settle before we engage. It gives us time to process, to evaluate, and to decide whether the words we are about to release will heal or harm. Silence becomes a pause button, one that can save friendships, marriages, and even entire families from unnecessary fracture. Philosophically, silence in these heated situations reflects mastery of the self. Many traditions remind us that strength is not in conquering others, but in conquering our own impulses. The one who can stay quiet in the middle of chaos holds more power than the one who shouts the loudest. Because silence in conflict is not surrender, it is sovereignty. It is saying, asterisk, I will not let your chaos dictate my peace. I will not let this moment drag me into becoming someone I am not. Asterisk, that kind of composure is rare, and it is respected far more than endless arguments. But let us be clear, silence in such situations is not about suppressing your truth. It is about choosing the right moment and the right manner to express it. There is a time to speak, but wisdom teaches us that time is not when anger rules the room. By remaining silent, you are not denying your voice. You are strengthening it, preparing it for a moment when it will be heard with clarity rather than drowned in noise. In practical terms, silence can also disarm conflict. Imagine two people shouting at each other, voices raised, tempers flaring. Suddenly, one of them stops speaking. The energy shifts. The silence unsettles the chaos. It creates space for the other person to hear their own anger, to recognize its futility. That silence, in many cases, speaks louder than words could. It says, asterisk, this conversation is no longer worthy of my peace. Asterisk, and often, that quiet strength ends the battle more effectively than any shouted rebuttal. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where speaking would only worsen the storm, remember that silence is not retreat. It is resistance. It is the conscious refusal to let a moment of anger destroy what a lifetime of love or respect has built. It is the discipline to value peace over pride. Because sometimes the wisest thing you can say in a heated moment is nothing at all. And in that silence, you protect both yourself and the ones you love. There is a silence that doesn't come from restraint in conflict or control in anger, but from the deep decision to observe rather than constantly express. This silence is the silence of growth. Life is always teaching us something, but not everyone learns. And the reason is simple. Most people are too busy talking, too busy proving, too busy displaying, to truly notice the lessons unfolding around them. Silence in this context is not about holding your tongue, it is about opening your eyes. It is about creating space to listen, not only to others, but to life itself. Think about it. A seed does not grow with noise. It grows in quiet soil, unseen and unnoticed, until its roots are strong enough to break through the ground. Human growth works the same way. We don't develop wisdom when we are always broadcasting our thoughts, when we insist on being heard in every room. We develop wisdom when we step back, observe, and allow experience to speak to us in silence. Growth is not loud, it is subtle, and it requires stillness to be recognized. From a psychological point of view, silence sharpens awareness. When you stop speaking for a moment, you start noticing what others miss. The tone behind words, the hesitation before answers, the emotions in someone's eyes. You notice your own thoughts more clearly, too. You begin to separate what is real from what is noise. This heightened perception becomes a form of intelligence. You start responding not just to words, but to the truths beneath them. And that is how silence transforms into wisdom. Philosophically, silence in observation is an act of humility. It is admitting that you don't need to have all the answers right now. It is the courage to say, I am willing to learn before I speak, to understand before I act. And this humility protects you from arrogance, from rushing into conclusions, from the blindness that comes with always wanting to be right. The greatest thinkers, leaders, and creators throughout history all had one thing in common. They valued silence as a teacher. They knew that knowledge comes from listening, from watching, from allowing the world to reveal itself, not from filling every moment with their own voice. And silence in growth also teaches patience. We live in a culture obsessed with speed, fast results, instant responses, immediate validation. But real transformation does not happen instantly. It unfolds slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Just as the sun rises without noise and yet lights the whole world, growth comes in silence and yet changes everything. To sit in silence, to observe patiently, is to align yourself with the natural rhythm of life rather than fighting against it. This kind of silence gives you power not over others, but over yourself. You learn when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to stay still, when to push forward and when to let things unfold. And this balance, this inner discipline, is what makes your actions more impactful when the time finally comes to speak or to act. So let silence be your companion in growth. Don't rush to fill every empty space with noise. Don't feel the need to constantly prove that you know, that you can, that you are enough. Let your silence gather wisdom. Let it shape your strength. Let it refine your patience, because in the end, silence is not just the absence of sound. It is the presence of awareness. And in that awareness lies the foundation of true growth. Sometimes the most powerful way to become more is simply to be still,